Going to focus and do a bit of work. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi there, welcome, and thanks for joining us on for a very exciting panel. We're going to talk about the weather and how weather reporting can play a unique and crucial role in helping us all to engage with our climate emergency. Now, this is part of a very special event series running all week at COP from the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Sky and STV in association with Albert and Natural Capital Partners, focusing on television's role in raising awareness about climate change. So it's my great pleasure to welcome some very familiar faces on our panel today. Weather broadcasters Laura Tobin from ITV, Judith Ralston from BBC, Batty from STV, and joining us virtually is Liam Dutton from Channel 4. There he is. Nice to see you, Liam. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And please do send in your questions to the panel. Head to Slido. The code should be on the screen as well. And hashtag AskWeather. Is there a code as well, or just hashtag AskWeather? There is. There you go. You know more than I do. Okay, let's get this conversation started. I think it's going to be a really fascinating and enlightening one. Judith, if I can come to you first. You have got quite a task ahead of you now. Well, actually for quite a while. You are there to report the weather. You don't have a very long time to do it. And yet you are pretty much on the front line when it comes to seeing the real results of how climate change is affecting our weather patterns and the extreme weather events we're experiencing. So, do you think we need to permanently link up the weather and the global climate?
Personally, no, not on a day-to-day basis, because obviously weather forecasting is the day-to-day health of the country, the world, your patch that you cover. So it's kind of difficult to expand into climate. However, I do think when we do have events, as we're seeing more and more, just last week we saw that rain in Scotland, which was just quite incredible, and not just in the summer, we had drought there in the southwest of Scotland. So I think it's incorporating these events into our weather forecasts. For example, saying, this is an unusual amount of rain. Trying to put it into people speak so they understand without talking about it scientifically, and having not got a science background like my esteemed colleagues here, I feel that I have to really understand what's going on so I can put it simply to our audience, because we haven't got much time. So we're talking about heavy rain, even putting in how much is going to fall, how many millimetres or millilitres, whatever it is, how much is going to fall. It's, people don't understand that, or the height. Some people don't know the height of where they live. So talk about snow depths, for example, at such and such a height. I don't know what height I live at, so not many people do. It's one of those
that's on hills.
Yeah, over hills, higher ground. And actually, if you live in high ground, you're on high ground.
Yeah.
So it's having to sort of break things down into really simple speak for our audience. As you see, we haven't got much time. I mean, I had 55 seconds last week, one morning, to fit in an amber warning, what was happening, plus the rest of the country. So you edit in your head, and you have to edit simply to break it into simple speak for your patch. That's
and
what
I think
I
Judith actually gets more time than any of us. Probably all of us
push
together.
for it.
Oh, what's going on? So it's about, as you mentioned there, incorporating a few words here and there that can kind of add to the picture, but ultimately people want to know what the weather is going to be like during that day. But I think all of your roles have evolved and changed based on what what you're learning at the very front line, as I mentioned, of this crisis we face. So, Laura, how have you seen your role as weather broadcaster evolve? What other types of programming are you making, and how it stands to evolve in the future as well?
I think the thing first and foremost is for weather presenters, we're allowed in people's living rooms and in their houses, and they trust us mostly with the information that we give them. And it's nice to be that trusted voice. And for us I probably started about 10 years ago, and then I think more and more in the last 5, particularly the last 2 years, we are all now putting more tiny bits of content and linking it to climate change, and it becomes more normalised. People at first, when We first used to put it in and be like, oh, half an hour about climate change again. But then the more often you do it, the more you're trusted, the more people want to hear about it, and it becomes part of the weather broadcast. But first and foremost, we have to deliver the weather forecast. It can't be sacrificed for time for content on climate. That needs to come additionally. But then equally, when you have extreme rainfall events, you can put them into context of what that means in our current climate, and you already are talking about climate change without labouring the point.
Okay. And over time, Sean, have you found that your audience is hungry for more information about what's going on with the climate and how it plays a role in sort of the weather that they're experiencing locally?
Well, I would say yes and no. I think that climate change certainly is still a very upper class, it's a middle class thing. When you go to parts of, say, Dundee or Glasgow, here, it's really not on people's agenda, climate change, because there are more important day-to-day things for them. But I certainly think that there is a move towards, they want more understanding, and it's like guys here were saying that it's putting it into a context they understand. So, for example, I've just been recently working on some research where I've been talking about how much rainfall has increased. Stornoway, for example, has seen an increase of rainfall of 100 millimetres since the 1940s. If we were to presume the whole of the Isle of Lewis had the same increase in rainfall, it's about 127,000 Olympic swimming pools worth of water. It's trying to give people a picture of what it is you're talking about, because they can understand 127,000 Olympic swimming pools. That's a heck of a lot of water. And that is the increase that you've seen since the 1940s. And it's trying to put that into a context. And I know, Laura, you were recently in Svalbard. I did a programme in Iceland a few years ago, and you get criticism for going to these places, but you also get a lot of positive feedback, because people like to be able to see how things are changing. But it's about bringing it back to home. It's about, yes, these bigger events are happening, but how's that changing in my back garden? How much more water am I getting in my back garden? How much drier is it in the summer? And it's talking to people about these extremes and just making it relatable to them.
Absolutely, and certainly making it, changing the fact that, as you mentioned there, some people might think there are, and it's their perception, they're absolutely right, in their daily lives there seem to be more important things that they need to deal with. Meanwhile, it's part of all of our jobs as communicators to communicate that the most important thing that's going to affect you is climate change. So it's about finding ways to do that. And Liam, do you think that, Sean mentioned it there, not all of us are making that connection between what's global warming, climate change, and what's happening locally. So not enough of us are making that connection. The weather that's happening here on my doorstep is a result of climate change. How do we go about continuing to tackle that? What have you found to be the most effective ways of doing that?
Well, I think, people love the weather. We all moan about it. We talk about it all the time. And I think people feel confident and comfortable in talking about weather in an everyday context. I think the challenge for us as communicators in science and weather is to do the same for climate change. When there's an extreme weather event, to kind of join the dots, explain how much more often this is going to happen in future, how much it's already changed compared to the past, and almost empower people to have the same conversations about climate change as they do about everyday weather. And I think we're making progress, but there's still work to be done, because I think people tend to find things quite overwhelming to take in so much information at one time. And as we've already covered there with Sean and Judith and Laura mentioning, I think it's about, seizing the opportunity when we get the extreme weather events, because that's when people have a thirst for the extra information, and then filling that gap with the knowledge that they need to help them, make decisions and understand things better.
Absolutely. Speaking of extreme weather events, do you think some areas of the media are responsible for making the problem worse when it comes to saying, "Ooh, we're getting an amazing hot summer. This is fantastic. Get out there and enjoy the beaches"? Do you struggle with that kind of messaging sometimes, Liam?
I think it's a challenge, because sometimes, you get stories that are kind of hyped up a lot, and and it makes our job very difficult as people trying to give, a sensible, balanced message to the public. And then when you have these kind of hyperbolic stories running along in the background, it can be a hindrance, particularly when it comes to things like snow, because people tend to worry a lot, understandably, because it can have a huge impact. So I think, when these things are written more or less just for clickbait, and they're kind of hindering what we're trying to do on a day-to-day basis, it can really be a problem, more so than people think.
We have quite a lot of different challenges on our hands, don't we? Even with the term global warming, and then you have an unusually cold spell, and people are questioning, well, it's really, really cold here. How can that be global warming? Give me an example of what you need to explain with respect to that polar vortex that we hear talked about, and how that plays into particularly cold spells, but it's still all global warming.
Yeah. And there's still a lot of studies into what's affecting the polar vortex, the jet stream, how it's changing. And there is that perception that, certainly in Scotland, if the temperature is going to reach 32, 31, everybody, most people here are thinking that's a great thing. But
Taps off.
Taps off, yeah, it's our Scottish term for it, above 18
What's this?
degrees.
What do you call it?
Taps off.
I'll let you explain it.
Love it.
Your traditional Scotsman likes to get his top off in the summer, not to be very fair-skinned.
They do that in Ireland as well.
That happens above 15 or 18 degrees. But I think it's about trying to connect the volatility of the weather now. And that is the thing that, we had the beast from the east here in Scotland. And central Scotland, Inverclyde, Dumbartonshire, these are areas around Glasgow, even Glasgow city centre, had record snowfall. And a lot of people might have said, hang on a minute, because of the old term global warming. Why, we've got global warming happening, so how can we get extreme snowfall? How is it possible to get record snowfall in Glasgow? Just a few years ago, I thought this was all supposed to be changing. But if you look at the average pattern of the amount of snow that we're getting now, the amount of days of lying snow we're getting, it certainly in Scotland has dropped drastically. Braemar, there's been about a 20 to 30 day drop in the numbers of days that we've got lying snow in the last 20, 30 years. But the extremes are still there. Yes, we are always, even in the future, we will get snow, but we will probably get more extremes. And I think that's a really difficult thing to prepare for. Think about it.
And to even get your head around, how that works.
Yeah, and how does a country prepare for, and how does the public prepare for the fact that they're going to struggle potentially respiratory issues in the summer, and then still, in some occasional winters, we're going to get stuck in our homes because of snow and flooding.
Do you think these events are from the Met Office, you work alongside the Met Office a lot, so I'll speak about the Met Office. They do tend to forecast these events very, very well. So warnings are usually out, so the public are prepared, and that's where our job comes in, is to prepare the public what they can do, the precautions they can take to, if we are going to see extreme snow, and we're starting to see the heat wave warming coming in as well. Yeah. So I think they are pretty well, forecast, which is great. I've seen that. That's one change I've seen in my career, is how accurate the forecasts have become.
Yeah. Laura, it's not so long ago that there was a lot of caution and even scepticism about connecting an extreme weather event to global warming. But scientists have been very clear for quite some time now that we need to make those connections, and there's a ever-growing field of science called attribution science.
Woohoo!
Celebrate attribution science today. Tell me what it is, and how that's helping us to better understand how climate change is affecting us and increasing these extreme weather events.
And you think the thing is that everything is changing all the time. The science is changing, the understanding is changing, the likelihood that we are confident with our results are changing. So
it's evolving.
Everything
That's what
all the time.
All about.
And when people say, 10 years ago you said this, but the science has evolved. So we used to say we are in for more frequent, more severe weather events because of climate change. Well, no. Every weather event now is more severe because of climate change, explaining that an atmosphere which is warmed by 1 degree will hold 7% more moisture. So the same storm now will have more rainfall than it would have done, without that 1 degree of warming. And so the Met Office had an attribution study out today. I like to mention the word because I love it.
It feels like joy.
It does. I actually am, in my weather forecast every day and across ITV, we know it's really important to add, if you add a little bit of science and people go away with a little bit of understanding of what the weather is doing and why, that is great, and people can be more informed. Yeah, yeah. So there was the big heat wave in Europe. We had the highest temperature ever recorded in Sicily, 48.8 degrees. And in a world where we haven't warmed it, that would happen once every 10,000 years. But the atmosphere we have now, where the world is warmed, it will happen once in 3 years. So actually, you can do that really quickly, really, really simply. If it wasn't for us, it would happen once every 10,000, but now it'll be once every 3 years. That's simple, and you can attribute us as humans to being the cause for that. And that's a really easy way of communicating climate change. People today were going in my ear like, wow, that's...
And you made a very good point there about how, but 10 years ago you were saying this. I mean, that's why I have trouble sort of following the science. But that's the beauty of science. First of all, this is the first time in our history that we're facing such an existential crisis. And we are also at a time in our history where our technology and our ability to study really complex natural systems like the weather and how climate change is affecting it, we've just gotten better at that. It's the evolution of the scientific process. And lucky for us, despite what we're facing, we're much more able now to model these things accurately to give us a better idea. So there's a coalition, there's an attribution science coalition doing this now. And give us a few more examples of what they found in the last few months, I think it is, this past summer. Tell us a bit more about how they could pinpoint the heat waves going on in the States and Canada, and how they went about doing that.
So the Canadian heat wave was even something that I'm sure was really hard for us to get our heads around. The temperature there reached nearly 50 degrees Celsius. The temperature there was higher than it has ever been in Las Vegas. You think Las Vegas is so much further south. How is that even possible?
They had the same temperatures as a desert has up in Canada.
Thousands of miles further south. Yeah. And the science said that in a world that we haven't warmed, that would happen once every 250,000 years. It now, in the world we have, would happen once every 1,000 years, and the current projections by the end of the century, I think it would happen once in 10 years. But actually, the scientists were saying, well, if we're saying this is a once in 1,000-year event and it's happening now, maybe even our science is wrong, because this is happening when it's so unlikely. So events that are technically impossible are now possible and becoming more likely.
So just as the science is evolving, the modelling needs to catch up to the pace of change. We're seeing that across the board, actually. As a biologist, we're seeing that with, just to give you an analogy, I'm going off piste here, but great white sharks are moving further north in California, the juveniles in particular, because the oceans are warmer. But the pace of change of the temperature change of the oceans and how all these species are moving north is faster than science can keep up with, how the research process happens. And the same is true for weather forecasting and climate change forecasting. So it's an exciting field to be in, but I mean, the pressure is on to try and keep up with the pace of change. So Judith, you mentioned there, or one of you mentioned Beast from the East. You did, Sean, didn't you? We're finding that the public are more responsive to local stories, aren't they? Yep. Stories closer to home. Judith, tell me a little bit about why you think that is, because you do a lot of reporting on the ground, and you're finding the response is still better. Why do you think that is?
Sorry, they're finding
sort of responding to what's happening on the ground locally. People are just find it easier to relate than, say, stories further afield.
I think because they're actually seeing the evidence, aren't they? I mean, the Beast from the East was quite incredible. Again, it was well forecast. But I was here and talking about this snow just piling in, and people were actually visibly seeing it and were stuck in it, and so it's tangible to them. And again, the link is to climate change. So they're getting a feel for it. I mean, climate change is that kind of, if you think about weather as the day-to-day health, say, or day-to-day personality even, climate change is the underlying problems that are going on with your health, and it comes out every now and then, doesn't it, in the weather, like the Beast from the East, like what happened last week. So I think when people are actually tangibly seeing these events taking place, they're believing us, they look to us, they trust us. I know that that's a big thing with what goes on in Scotland with politics and football. We're kind of out of all that, so they trust us totally, and that's a big, because we are in their front rooms or whatever every night, and we're part of their kind of their day-to-day routine. So they'll trust
the weather person's sort of everybody's friend.
Yeah, definitely. You'll find that as well.
Controversial.
You are. I hear that you're like George Clooney around here. People follow him around and shout, Sean!
That you are the George Clooney. We had a panel here with all the CEOs of the channels that are part of this week of communication. And they mentioned you. They said you are the George Clooney. We're going off piece again, everyone. But, and I was like, I'm going to have to beat the autograph hunters off with a stick as you come on the stage. But you are trusted. That's the point. There's an interesting responsibility here, isn't there?
There is a responsibility, and I find that I really try. I mean, you know what it's like when you're going on with the weather forecast. I've never quite got it planned in my head what I'm going to say, but I know the story. And I know what is essential for the public to hear out of my mouth so they can act on it. I think you'll all agree with that, you know.
And Liam, if I can come to you, when it comes to this, I think a potential issue of people sort of only being able to relate to things if it happens on their own doorstep versus the bigger picture, the bigger understanding that everything is interconnected, because you know, we're at COP26 here. We know how important that is with respect to finding solutions to this existential crisis. So, as a weather broadcaster, how do you try to communicate how something miles away in the Pacific still ultimately affects us, and therefore we all have to work together as a global community to solve this? There's a great example you gave in one of your reports about, you know, an El Nino in the Pacific and an unusually warm period there, how that affects the whole planet.
I mean, you know, just take tropical storms, hurricanes, typhoons, for example. You know, they're getting more powerful. We're reaching greater strengths and depths, and you know, those storms are really powerful, and they don't just have effects of where they hit. You know, these beasts of storms can hit the jet stream and send ripples in the jet stream that can kind of traverse a third of the planet. So, you know, you can get a typhoon in the Pacific that hits the jet stream, sends a ripple across North America into the Atlantic Ocean, and downstream it can actually have an indirect effect on our weather. So it just kind of proves that, you know, the interconnectedness of the weather, and, you know, it's not somebody else's problem. It can also be our problem, because the ripples of influence extend far and wide from where the main event can actually happen. So it's just about taking opportunities to kind of give that perspective when we have the chance. And I think on Channel 4 News, we do a lot of international news as well. We have the extra time to kind of go into that level of depth. And I think the audience really appreciate it. And it just makes them go, wow, you know, I didn't think that was possible, but it is, and that's how it works.
As harrowing as some of the predictions are, it's also fascinating to learn, thanks to you all, you know, how the planetary system works, weather patterns work across the planet. What do you think we can expect to see with respect to our weather changes here, Liam, in the coming years if the people across the river don't sort their stuff out in time? And do you think the UK is prepared for that? Because we still tend to think that the main real extreme weather events are happening, you know, sort of in Australia with the wildfires, or the Arctic is melting. What stands to happen here in the UK?
Well, you know, it'll be more of what we've had already, and as the temperatures rise, there'll be even more extremes. I mean, I think the most outstanding factor that's changed since I've been presenting the weather in the past 18 years is that we've broken the national UK maximum temperature record twice. We had our warmest winter day on record, reaching 21.2 in February. And you know, as the temperatures continue to rise, those sorts of extremes will happen even more often or become more extreme. We had the heat wave last summer that lasted 6 days, where we had 34 degrees across southern and eastern parts of England. That was thought to have been responsible for around 2,000 excess deaths. So, you know, there's also the perspective that heat is often thought of as a good thing, but, you know, it can really make people struggle, particularly sleeping at night and the repetitive days of ongoing heat. So I just think, you know, we're going to see more of the same. We're going to see more of, you know, more extremes, greater amounts of rainfall. Summers will be drier and hotter, but when we do get downpours in summer, they'll be even more intense, which is particularly troublesome for infrastructure in major cities where there's lots of concrete. So, you know, more extremes, and I don't think we're there yet. You know, you see flood defences when there's flooding very close to capacity, and if the rainfall is just going to get more intense, then it just begs the question as to what lies ahead, really, for those who don't have defences that are not bolstered or have more investment put into them.
Okay, so it's definitely going to get worse here, never mind having to be aware of what's going on around the world in developing countries that are already really, their backs are really against the wall with what's happening. So it's a global issue, it's also a local issue, and what's important is engaging everybody in the problem. So
it's picking the right stories at the right time.
Exactly.
Like every day we could all say to our newsrooms, I've got a really interesting weather story, and they're going, really, every day. So, you know, the right ones, you know, when you have flooding in China like we saw earlier this year, and then almost immediately you also had the flooding in Europe, you know, yes, people want to know about how it's going to affect us closer to home, but when you get those, you know, the highest amount of rainfall they've ever seen in an hour or in a day, they are totals that you can understand. You know, they had as much rain in a whole day there that we would have in the whole year in London, and that these are now happening not just in China, but in Europe and on our doorstep. And you go, oh, it's getting closer and closer and closer. And so, yes, you can report the world ones when they are really interesting, and then also then link it coming back closer to home.
That's fascinating in itself.
I think what I found recently is when I've been talking about climate change on television, it's quite a difficult sell. If you were to go up to somebody in the street in Glasgow, and you were to say that summers are going to be slightly drier, yes, there will be heavier downpours, we'll see less snow, we'll see less frosts, growing season potentially a little bit longer, the summers will be warmer. A lot of people would say, but hang on a minute, that's a good thing, right? Isn't it? Summer's going to be drier, warmer. But it's like you say, it's picking the times, the extremes, and saying, this is not right. What I've started doing in the forecasts is going down the route of an American presenter and talking about bonkers temperatures, or these are just crazy numbers for this time of year, because because I've spent so long saying, well, tonight those temperatures are 9 degrees above normal, tonight they're 12 degrees above normal, because we're seeing those big increases in temperatures, especially overnight. And we have seen bonkers temperatures. Remember in December we had that 18, 19 degrees in the Highlands in December.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only way you can describe it. It's crazy. And that then connects with people at home. Hang on, this is not right. And I've been doing it more and more often now. And people like it because, 8, 10 degrees above normal, what does that mean? Yeah, it's a warm night. But actually, this is crazy. It shouldn't be happening.
Good on you. I mean, it's finding the right language to get people to understand. And I can hear the passion in your voice. You are, as I said, at the intro, you're at the front line. You're seeing this writ large and everything you do. It's your job. And, we're going to get onto your Svalbard piece as well, which is incredibly powerful. And so it's about finding all the tools, chipping away at how you can communicate that to people. But also, you're all doing sort of different types of programming, around this issue of how we live on this planet, what we face. Tell me a bit about the other programming you're making. I mean, we're going to get into the short films in a bit, but just you made another series that wasn't about climate change per se, but plays into this whole, hopefully changing, our perception of our place here.
Well, so I had a series, Sean Scotland, where we travelled around the country. We showed off the beautiful country that Scotland is, but we also talked a lot about ecotourism. But then this programme, it's a 3-part series. There's another one on tonight. And anybody that's missed it can get it on the STV Players.
You heard it.
And that's now available across the UK. So, Liam, you can watch it as well later. So Don't Waste Scotland is a series which looks at, we're not doing hard science in the programme, but we're also not talking about 100 ways to recycle a toilet roll tube. We're looking at things that people can do at home, things that are relatable, small changes. What we say is small changes by everybody together can make a big difference. That's the kind of motto. And I think that's the case for everything, isn't it? If we make very small changes at home, and that's what it's about doing. It's driving it home to, whether you've got a big garden, you're in you live in a forest and you have acres of land, or whether you're the upper story of a high flat, everybody can do something to help. And it's just about giving them the tools, the information they need to be able to work out what they can do.
Trying not to be too scary. I mean, I have to do a lot of things with kids, and it's trying to turn it into a positive, rather than the world's going to end. But listen, guys, we can do something about this, just like you were saying.
Well, it's funny you're saying that, because actually I've had an email from somebody the last couple of weeks who I need to get back to. Their granddaughter now is finding it difficult to go to school because they've been teaching them about climate change. And now she has a real anxiety. She has fear of the weather now. And he has asked if I can talk to her and reassure her that actually... And that's it, isn't it? It's about finding that fine line where we don't frighten people.
And we turn it into a positive.
It's about, personally, it's not shying away from the facts. Obviously slightly communicated in a different way for a slightly younger audience, but with that solution straight away. We're constantly challenging ourselves, aren't we, with respect to how much we tell people. Why is it people still don't really fully understand what 1.5, keeping 1.5 alive is? What is even 1.5, or how are we going to get there? All those things I think we need to, from my end of communication, communicate more. But with it, recent research has shown that the public just want solutions. Otherwise, they do want to switch off. They do get climate eco-anxiety. So it's about all of it, isn't it? Doing it holistically and making sure that with the harsh realities of what we're facing, we're giving very practical solutions, no matter the age group. Judith, you presented on Our Planet Now recently. I was watching some clips before this. Tell me a bit about that experience and how the local stories, you know, why they were so important as part of what you were trying to say on that programme.
Well, it was really interesting. We took a trip down to Dumfries and Galloway and did a wee tour around speaking to people who lived there who had been affected by the weather, by drought. Spoke to one farmer who had no water connection. It was a hill farmer, so he was high up. Yeah, you looked down from where his farm was, and there was a huge freshwater loch. You know, so that was, you think, well, why hasn't he got any water? And what was very interesting about going down there was how the communities have prepared themselves for situations, because they have suffered from a lot of flooding. The southwest of Scotland's right in the kind of firing line for southwesterly winds, for heavy rain. You know, there's a lot of rain in that neck of the woods. It's a milder part of the world generally. So with the rise in temperatures, means more moisture in the atmosphere going to fall down on Dumfries and Galloway. So there are actually communities starting to prepare themselves and what to do when a flood comes, because there are elderly people in the communities who are stuck in their homes. So everybody's got a role. So people are actually coming together to try and, you know, work out, you know, when action stations, when something happens. And I find that really interesting, because we don't see so much of that in the city. But they're having to do it because fire engines can't get to New Galloway or to Kirkcudbright, you know, so they have to be ready to deal with it themselves. It's almost like people with buckets, you know, passing them up and down, but they have to be so proactive in saving themselves and the vulnerable in their communities. That was really interesting, but it was heartwarming too, because communities have come together.
Yeah, collaboration, working together. I mean, it brings me back to that, well, it brings us back to the sort of the reality of what's going on the ground, hits home, makes people understand that it's happening here in this country, and yet then also arguably can create even more anxiety, right? Yeah. Because it's here, there's no getting away from it. So how do you find yourself dealing with that, navigating the realities of what's happening versus sort of the eco-anxiety that might contribute to naturally, and how to deal with that?
I think it's talking about the science, like you said, what is happening now and the reality, but also the fact that there are amazing solutions. So at ITV, we have all of our regions who, not just the news teams, but the weather teams go out. We've had like 74 hours this year covering topics in the environment and climate change, solutions that are happening on the ground. So it's like bottom-up changes, and people can see that there's solutions, that we're protecting coasts, or that there might be coasts that we can't protect, and there's definitely anxiety there, that forests are being used, you've got your planting of your seagrass, you've got your peatlands. So I think it's showing all the positive stories and all of the mitigation that is being done to help for the future.
Have you learned to, I mean, you mentioned there are peatlands and seagrasses and all of these natural solutions that I've just, you know, been immersed in ever since I started in television. Have you found yourselves, your wealth of knowledge has grown exponentially?
Brain is exploding.
And how have you found that?
I love it. I just love learning. I think it's so important. And I have a little girl called Charlotte who's 4. Before she was even born, I just wanted her to be a scientist. I'm trying my hardest.
Don't be one of those mothers. Do what you love, darling.
But you know, she gets it already. You know, we have an allotment this year. We wanted to teach her about growing your own. And then I went to the shop the other day and she said, "Mummy, what are we buying?" I said, "Oh, we're buying some plastic for the allotment." She was like, "Mummy, plastic is bad. We can't buy plastic." And I saw someone walk past thinking, "Good luck with that." I was like, "We need this plastic. It's okay." But you know, it's not being anxious for the young people, but also, you know, she makes sure we put everything in the right bin all the time. So I just think, you know, already educating her is great. And actually the young people are the ones who are really sponges taking it all in and really get it.
And you and your daughter can write a letter to that particular shop and go, "Can you provide other things than plastic for the allotment, please?" Liam, Sean is going to, immediately after this panel, reply to that email for that young child who needs a conversation. And while he's at it, tell us a bit about how you approach communicating this topic to a younger audience. How do you go about it, Liam?
Well, I think, you know, I'm writing a book at the moment for children, which is due out next year, and obviously climate change was inevitably going to be part of that. And I had to think really carefully about the tone that I used, and you know, to make it, although there are things that are happening that are not good, you know, extreme weather, the impacts that it's having, just to kind of break it down into smaller chunks, and as we've discussed already, say the things that you can do, you know, eat less meat, you know, make sure you protect nature, and a variety of other things, fly less, walk to school if it's safe to do so rather than having somebody take you in the car. So it's about, although you're providing, the facts about what is happening and things that are happening that are not good, you're immediately also presenting things that are quite positive. So it's not, I think the key is not to make it all doom and gloom, because, people, as we said already, who have anxiety about those sort of things really find it hard to deal with just a negative message. So it's saying, yes, this is an issue, but actually, we're more than capable, if we get our acts together, that we can kind of deal with this and get to net zero, hopefully before when everybody's pledged.
250 won't cut it, ladies and gents. There's an argument for sort of leaning into the discomfort of seeing the reality of what we're facing too, that I think sometimes we shy away from in society. Like, that's a bad feeling, you don't want to feel anxiety. Well, we've kind of gotten to this point where it's almost absurd we've let it get this far. How about we just all together lean into it, feel the discomfort, and then work our way through it and find solutions that way? That's what I try and talk to younger people about, which may help with the eco-anxiety. Liam, you have some thoughts as well, I saw, on social media, the engagement of social media, the good, the bad and the ugly. Talk me through your experiences.
Yeah, I mean, generally, to be fair, I find it pretty good. I mean, you get the odd bit of negativity, as most people do who are on social media. But I think people see it as a way, say, for example, if I've been on Channel 4 News and it's been a news package on an extreme weather event, and I've given some analysis and linked in climate change, and sometimes people feel as though they're not quite sure about what I meant, or they'd like some more information, and they feel comfortable, as we all are trusted faces generally, that they can kind of get in touch on social media and ask for extra information. So it goes beyond that delivery of information via TV, and then it becomes almost like a two-way conversation where people can kind of gain extra information. And I think it's really nice that people can feel comfortable that they can, approach us and just ask these questions rather than feel, I feel as though I'm being silly by asking this. They just feel as though they have that, that access to us to find out the extra information that they want.
That's a good thing. It also, again, I think I mentioned it before, there's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. So, Laura, how do you feel this has affected you as you were, embarking on this fantastic career and things started to change and you could see it again at the front line? How do you feel it's affected you personally and professionally? Does it drive you? Do you sometimes wish you didn't know as much as you did? How do you navigate
I think
that?
it's a little bit of everything. We all love and are passionate about the weather, but increasingly that weather has become more severe because of climate change. And so we want to inform our viewers of that. I genuinely, some nights, struggle to sleep and I feel really anxious, probably more because I have a daughter and think about it more. And it's really important, like you said, to communicate it without scaring people, but also to show people the reality. And it's a really hard one to do both, but it's important to listen to people's voices. So, it used to be a few years ago, is climate change really happening? Is it real? Is it the sun? Is it the cycle? Is it the volcanic activity? How do we know it's this? We now know, and I think that the public know, and we don't need to keep explaining that to them. But now, like we're saying, people want to know what they can do. And I think it's really important that we don't finger point, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. It's about things that each individual can do. And we can communicate as much as we can. And that is what we are trying to do. But I'll finger point if you're having a single-use plastic bottle or a single-use cup, obviously. But just making sure that everybody has all the information from us that we're trusted to give it to them.
Well, when it comes to increasing communication, you went to Svalbard recently. I thought they were incredibly powerful and fabulous pieces of filmmaking that you did. Let's take a quick look at a clip of you in Svalbard. Okay.
Earth is on the cusp of irreversible and catastrophic overheating, the last decade the warmest decade on record. In the Arctic, warming is increasing up to 3 times faster than the rest of the world, and here in Svalbard, in the high Arctic, at least 5 times faster. New figures given exclusively to Good Morning Britain show that in the last 50 years, the average winter temperature here has increased by 7.7 degrees, and the average summer temperature has increased by 2.5 degrees. Nowhere on the planet is heating this fast. I came here to the Longyear Glacier with guide Arne Kristoffersen. He arrived in 1980 as a coal miner, the year before I was born, and showed me just how much it's changed in this short time.
here we would have been underneath the glacier.
We would have been under the glacier here.
Yeah, so the ice cap of the longer glacier behind me, it reached roughly 50 meters in front of us now, and some meter higher.
Glaciers are at their lowest for 2,000 years, and this retreat is only going to get worse. Current projections that we could lose 50% of all glaciers by 2100, and that would have devastating impacts on the UK. If all the world's glaciers melted, the average global sea level rise would be 0.5 metre. That's enough to put parts of the Humber, swathes of Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire, parts of Kent and the Bristol Channel under water. The impacts I've witnessed here are a glimpse into our future, but this doesn't have to be our reality.
So, Laura, tell me how the trip came about and how it impacted you, both professionally and personally.
Well, my editor loves my passion for weather and climate change, and actually at Good Morning Britain we've just been doing more and more. I went to the Isles of Scilly, the most disproportionately place in the UK affected by climate change, and then this job came up, and I actually missed my daughter's first full day at school and her first week at school for this. But, you know, I didn't see that I was missing that because I was gaining so much from the experience there. And, you know, I went with the knowledge and science. I phoned the Met Office, spoke to some of the most latest intergovernmental panel climate scientists, the lead scientists in this area of cryosphere, to find out the very latest science. And I thought I knew what I was going into. I knew what I was going to see. I would see the ice melting and it's retreating and it's having these impacts. But when I saw it firsthand and in real life and speaking to the people there and how it's literally changing before their eyes, it just felt completely different. I felt honoured to be there, but I felt completely devastated by the fact that they seem so far away from us, yet what we are all doing away from there is affecting them so drastically. They're trying to make changes that affect the rest of the world. You know, the Arctic is one of the main drivers of the jet stream. The warmer they are, the less the difference. It changes our weather patterns. So it was important for our audience to see that what is happening there does directly affect us. But the clip when he was talking about the glacier, and it was still really hard to get my head around, he arrived the year I was born, so 40 years ago, and he said the glacier had retreated 0.5 mile. And I looked 0.5 mile that way and I thought, wow, that's a long way. And he went, yeah, but it was also 10 meters above our head, all that way. And that is every glacier in the whole of Svalbard, in the whole of the Arctic. And you just go, wow. And I remember talking to one of the scientists in the Met Office saying, you know, what's the projections? You know, we could have 2 to 3 meters of sea level rise. If we stopped all of our polluting, all of our emitting tomorrow, 2 to 3 meters, we're still committed to that in the next 2,000 to 3,000 years. And I said, well, people are going to say, why bother? It's going to rise, sea levels are going to rise. And he said, because if we get to 5 degrees of warming, that's 20 meters of sea level rise. You know, they can't have the tourism they used to because the ice fjord is no longer ice. It hasn't frozen over for years. They have to change all of their tourism. The reindeer are dying because there's rain and not snow, so they can't break through with their hooves when it rains and it freezes to eat. The polar bears no longer have the right food to eat because the waters are changing and they're having to go out further to find food and they're all dying. Every single thing that could be impacted there is changing, yet everybody there was just so happy to have us and to host us. So, you know, I got really emotional right at the end and I was really upset and I kind of got criticised for crying on my last broadcast, but it was more that it was overwhelming to see and experience, and that, you know, I genuinely could go back with my daughter and it would look completely different and there probably will be no polar bears by the time she's my age. And
I
think
saw
that's
that and I
not
thought it
fair.
was incredibly powerful. It was a human being feeling it, seeing it. That's what it's all about. Being criticised for that is absurd, in my opinion. And let's go there, because you got criticised for travelling there in the first place in the face of climate change.
You did.
I am a natural history presenter. I fly drastically less than I used to, but I still think that some of my trips are justified to go and look at the wildfires in California. I was in Svalbard a week after you to report on what's happening to the entire food chain there. So I'm unapologetic about some of the trips I still take. You had it in the, social media went crazy on
Yeah, it did.
So tell me about your thoughts about that.
So as soon as I was on the plane and we were flying there, I saw the social media feed and I said to my producer, and we, you know, beforehand we planned it and we talked about it. We took a minimal crew. There were 3 of us. We all flew economy, just saying, always do. We obviously had to fly there. Maybe we didn't, it would take a long time. And And we all discussed that the footprint that we would leave from our flight was significantly smaller than the impression and the footprint we would leave on our audience who were watching. You know, that breakfast audience and our breakfast audience on Good Morning Britain wouldn't probably normally tune in to, the majority of them, a documentary about Svalbard and how things are changing. And it was something that was taken to regular people and they saw it, and because we brought it closer to home, it impacted them. So that impact was far greater than our tiny one.
The way you communicate it, your implicit understanding of it is gold. And of course, we all have to do better. We have to improve the industry. We had a conversation about that earlier on this morning with all the broadcaster CEOs. We're doing better. We need to continue to do better. Not everybody, I mean, I feel incredibly privileged to be put in a place where the impact of nature anyway changes you forever. And then it's your role, your responsibility to communicate that to people who don't get to see it. That's how I feel incredibly passionate about what I do. And then in the changing face of it, it's just even raises the bar to how it's our role to be part of spreading that information to make sure that we all understand what's at stake here. And you did that job absolutely beautifully. So well done.
But actually, I just say it's very different, but you only have to look at the recent trip, space tourism, that, you know, William Shatner went to space and he looked down on Earth as a 93-year-old man and said his perception of Earth and his love of the planet has changed because he saw it from a different point of view. So like you say, seeing these things in real life changes you, and that's when you can help to make a difference.
And I mean, you touched on the whole social media, how people can contact us so easily now. I think one of the issues is that because we are in the public eye, like this year I got a new car and I thought, because COP's here, I need to be very careful what kind of car I pick. Because I thought if I was to pick, say, a diesel car, and then that was to get picked up, then that's not going to be a good look. So I ended up going for a plug-in hybrid. But because we're in the public eye, we're open to the criticism. And like you say, flying there, I was learning to fly a few years ago. That draws criticism as well. And it's that fine line, isn't it, of being able to, what you can bring to people as opposed to what they see as damage.
I mean, absolutely, and it's something we have to be mindful about. But then again, this is not about finger pointing because that's what's going on across the water far too much. But we do know the facts about the biggest contributors to climate change when it comes to their carbon footprint when they fly and the private jets that they use. And arguably one representative flew home to London instead of getting the train. There are many things that, you know, we can do, but we know where. And again, it's not, that's okay then. They're the biggest contributors, therefore we can fly a bit more. We're all responsible. But all of that plays into, you know, our global carbon footprint. We are running out of time. And I want to play your clip before
okay,
Sorry, go on, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I mean, we are open to that criticism, but what's quickly forgotten, and I know you're going to do an event on sport, what's quickly forgotten is that journalists, sport journalists, are flying all over the world following a team playing in Dubai or they're playing somewhere in Europe, and they're maybe doing that on a fortnightly basis. Do we need to be sending these journalists there? And you do one trip to try and highlight?
All of those questions have to be posed. And again, part of, I mean, I'm as guilty as, you know, part of the problem with solving our existential crisis is looking at other people. We have to be all in this together, but we also have to be mature about our analysis of what matters and where the biggest contributors are versus what some of us are doing in order to help the change that needs to happen on our planet. But it's a moving goalpost. It needs to be, we need to constantly check ourselves, revise ourselves, you know, and be our worst critics when it comes to that, for sure.
And you need to move on. With social media, and we were talking about this outside, I always look at the comments and then the ones that say this might be really negative, don't read it, because every voice matters. If you think, well, our audience are thinking that. So it's really important next time we talk about something that seems really obvious to address it, because not everybody believes, not everybody is in the same boat. So I just think we do have to read them, but then filter them out as well if they're.
Oh, that's
really
interesting.
neat.
I tend to not look at them, and now because of Laura, I'm going to go. Okay, because you're absolutely right. Those are the people we need to engage in conversation with. So you're all doing extracurriculars, but you know, you're doing more. You're doing more different types of reporting. And Sean, you made a series of short films specifically for COP. Let's take a look at one of them.
Well, I hate to break it to you, as the climate continues to warm, we're going to get even heavier downpours here in Scotland, and that means more flooding. The science: warmer air holds more water, creating bigger clouds and therefore heavier falls of rain. Now, our wettest days of the year are now getting a little wetter than they were for Granny back in 1940. Take the Botanics in Edinburgh, for example, where the wettest day in the 1940s would have brought around 30 millimetres of rain, and now it's about 40. So if we were to presume the whole of the Botanics gets the same amount of rainfall, that's an extra 25,000 bathfuls of water. Lerwick has had a 4 millimetre rise in rainfall on the wettest day since the 40s. But again, presuming the whole town gets the same rainfall, that's 125,000 more bathfuls of water on the wettest day of the year. We've all seen those days: intense rainfall, thunderstorms where our streets turn into rivers. Well, as rainfall intensity increases, this is only going to happen more often, as well as flooding.
Very nice.
I mean, to the point.
So
very powerful.
I was told that I had under a minute. So anybody that's not Scottish, and Alex, I know you'll know this as well. It's like when you try and get things on Instagram, and you've got to try and get it down to that. But a Scottish person talking at that speed, I'm sure that some people won't understand. But what that is what I've come up with is what I'm calling a Scot Cop stat. Trying to say that every night on television, Scott Cop see.
Exactly.
And so I've come up with this hashtag, and every night on television for the fortnight of COP, I'm showing a very short clip about something different.
Hey.
Number of records that have been broken, rainfall, temperatures, snow. So hopefully people will take something away from it. However, it has opened up criticism on Monday, because when that went out, somebody said, oh, you're making light of it, this is a very serious subject. But then it comes back to, it's that trying to engage a younger audience and also trying to not instill fear in people as well.
It was really easy to understand. I thought it was really quick, wasn't it?
Bathfuls, Olympic swim pools, it's all stuff that people sort of can picture, can't they?
Very quickly.
And with temperature, when we talk about a degree here and a degree here, we need to tell them that, in Scotland, a degree rise now means it's more likely to get to 35 in Scotland. Can you believe we've not reached 35 in Scotland yet? But, that's kind of where we're heading.
Yeah. With the criticism thing, I think we all need to be more responsible and at least look at them with one eye. And also know that everything in life, things are subjective. To a point, this is an existential crisis that everybody needs to be on board with. The science is clear, etc. But I think you take that on board, you think about why you did it, you're good with that, off you go, carry on. I think it's brilliant. So, it's always subject to discussion and evolution in a way. But I think we also have to be, why you did it. You stand firm with why you want to communicate things in different ways for different audiences, and I think that's a great thing.
And that's why I mentioned Granny in there, or Great Granny, because it makes it more emotive that your grandmother, things have changed since your grandmother, in the 1940s. Or like, for example, like my mum, the amount of snow that's changed since my mum was a little girl has been, 15 to 20 days a year here in Renfrewshire. So it's... in our lifetime, things are changing.
Yeah.
And think how that's going to be different for our children.
Exactly. So we have lots of questions. I'm so sorry I haven't got to them until now. But Liam, I'm going to pose you this first one. It's anonymous. It says, lots of people want to help prevent climate change, but don't know how to. Is this something weather presenters can help with? And should you be educating people in this role as well? I mean, you've got a lot on your plate if you do that as well. But Liam, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean... Just make sure I'm not muted. Yeah, I mean, I think, we have a limited amount of time, as we've discussed. So, we've got a lot to do in the 2 minutes that most of us have, if we're lucky. So what I would say there is that, yes, we should be able to direct people to information on social media, but also for people who make our programs to either give us more time elsewhere in the program, or, other correspondents and news presenters are quite capable of doing packages that kind of deliver that kind of information. And that stretches beyond just news programming, even other genres of programming, kind of hearing storylines about climate change in soaps and other things. It's about people hearing about climate change in lots of different places, so they gain that knowledge and that comfort of being able to have those conversations about it themselves.
Indeed. Do you find yourselves all asking for more time? Are you always saying, really? Is that a
Always.
battle?
And I always argue with them and say, oh, come on, 30 seconds off sport is nothing, so just cut that sport, give us more time for the weathers.
But I've definitely been pushing for more and more time, and when I get the extra time, the feedback from the audience is great. So now I have like a 2-minute slot every morning when I can do that, and that's happened right across our ITV newsrooms as well, that each of our regional weather presenters has that extra time. So the more you push, the more you get.
You were saying to me earlier as well, you were picking your battles. Sometimes you actually gave a minute back. I mean, who does that as a broadcaster? I've never done that.
Because you know, mad.
Yeah, what is she doing?
that again?
Because look, I don't need it today, but when you really need it, they'll like sort of give you the time.
Yeah, I think it's really important to, like we said, pick the time you want to talk about things. And also, we're talking about solutions. It's really important that they are positive, with people with anxiety. I walk with my daughter to and from school. We love looking at the cars. We love looking at the numbers on the door. She absolutely loves it. If we do drive somewhere, she'd be like, Mummy, why are we driving? I'm like, oh, well, this is a far away place. We need to drive here. So, there's so many benefits from walking. It will help to save the NHS so much money, so much more benefits to cutting red meat out of your diets. And if you do eat red meat, then buy British farmers, because I know that's a sticking point for some people. And that will help people cardiovascular, it will help the NHS. So tackling climate change isn't a negative. There are so many positives from it, and it's really important to say that as well.
Yeah, I think it's all positive, sure.
Here in Glasgow as well, they're definitely doing a lot with the schools with climate change, which has been terrific.
There's that fabulous cartoon that's gone around for years now about a climate change conference giving all the facts, and somebody in the audience goes, what if it's all a hoax and we make the planet better for ourselves for no reason? And that's it in a nutshell, really, isn't it? It's all long-term, it's positive. There's no negatives to doing this.
But we've seen science come to the fore recently, when we have Chris Whitty and, the worst case scenario. This is what worst case scenario could be. This is the best case. And it's trying to get people to understand that the climate is similar. It's this is worst case, this is the best case. And there's a bit more recognition of science being about probabilities as opposed to us knowing exactly what is going to happen. I think there's been a perception up until recently that.
Ever-improving analysis on probabilities. Cindy would like to know, we are on a trajectory for beyond 1.5. Even at 1.5, financial systems, housing and transport infrastructure are unadapted. Today's weather reporting, increasingly traumatic, a front line of climate comms. Does weather need a broader context? Climate psychology and commensurate government climate action? No, literally, you've got to do it all in 2 minutes. I mean, it's an interesting question because it's absolutely bang on with respect to everything that needs to be looked at, but how that is divided between yourselves, other communicators, members of society, businesses that can lead on some of these things. What are your thoughts about how we approach those things going forward? I mean, there's only so much you can communicate, as you said earlier.
At the end of the day, we are weather presenters giving a daily forecast for people to go about their daily work, and we can't lose sight of that.
That is the priority, yeah.
People want to know whether to take gloves, a hat, a warm coat, or a rain mate. Where should I get that from? An umbrella. But that's kind of what we shouldn't lose sight of as well. We can't go into the details of climate change. We just don't have the time on shift to start doing that as well. We need to have an allocated different time to do that and work in a whole different way to, I think, to start talking about things.
Online is a very big platform as well. I know something that we all use more and more. But as Sean was saying, it's everything. It's in our soaps, it's in our sports, it's in everything that we put out as content across all of our programming. And I know ITV have been doing loads and loads on that, particularly lately in script with Emmerdale. It's been a long time since we've been using reusable cups and having reusable bags. And it's every time we can put a little bit of it in the right context.
Like everything with respect to making things better, it's about collaboration and all working together. And the world is very different. It's a very different place now. And I think what's exciting about the panel we had earlier on today about how broadcasting is embracing this new shift is how communication on media platforms is going to change as well as sort of this kind of lovely, inclusive, cohesive, we're all in it together type of movement that I'm particularly very excited about, despite the challenges ahead of us. One last question for all of you before we run out of time. What's the one thing you would like everyone to know about climate change? Liam, can I come to you first and then I'll go down the line?
Ooh.
Ooh, That's a big one.
I mean, I think we've covered it really. Is that, you know, it affects everybody. It's you know, it's universal. It affects everybody. Some parts of the world are impacted more greatly than others. But I think, you know, we all need to be thinking about it. And if we're not, you know, if we don't have the information that we feel that we need, go out and search for it, or just get in touch on social media with people like us who can put them in the right direction.
Very nice. Sean, what are your thoughts?
I think probably it's not being isolationist about it, thinking about what's happening in our own backyard, because I think we touched on it earlier on when we saw what was happening in Canada, what we've seen happening in America, Australia, across Europe in the summer. It's quite easy for us just to say, well, you know, this is not here. It's not really affecting me. So it's trying to have an understanding of what we are doing here, like you said earlier, Laura, is having bigger impact somewhere else. And it's trying to not be, as I say, isolationist and think, well, things are changing here, but you know, it's not as drastic as it is elsewhere. It's somebody else's problem. It's not. It's all of our problem. If the imbalance will affect every single one of us. And as I said, with the stats that I've been looking at, we've already seen some big drastic changes here in Scotland, and that's just going to get worse.
We're all in this together.
Absolutely.
Judith,
Yeah,
what would you like to say?
I concur with that. But it's one world. We are one world. We must come together and unite to do something about it. Don't, like you say, we're not just Glasgow, Renfrewshire, the west of Scotland. Let children realise they are part of a massive global change and shift. And that in turn makes it exciting for them because they can do something.
Laura?
And I just think the extreme weather events we talked about that were impossible, that are now possible and becoming more likely, and the quicker we act and make change, the more we can be sure that these impacts won't be as catastrophic, and we can help to make the impacts much less.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much. We are out of time. I really enjoyed that conversation. Thank you very much to our panel, Liam, Judith, Laura and Sean. And thank you for joining us and for your questions both here at the BBC and online. So we hope this will get you talking about the weather in a different way so that more of us can engage with the challenges ahead. In order to be part of the solutions, we can all help to action. Now, I think we mentioned it earlier on, there's a sports panel going on tomorrow. You can join Sky Sports presenter Mike Wedderburn at 11 a.m. talking about how sports broadcasting can help combat climate change. And head to wearealbert.org/events to join that event and to catch up on all the other live streams going on this week. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a lovely afternoon. Well done. Thank you.